Welcome to Legally Speaking. I'm your host, Sophia Haynes. Legally Speaking is a public service of you and the law, a nonprofit whose mission is to provide information and resources to empower you in your legal affairs. While we provide legal information, it is in no way intended to be legal advice. So if you have a legal issue, make sure you retain the services of a licensed professional attorney. Today, we're talking about getting back to business and determining which business entity is right for you. So we brought one of our foremost experts to come in and talk to us about that, Attorney Heather Wright. Welcome, Heather.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. Could you tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Well, I have been an attorney for about 13 years. I practice in the Buckhead area in Atlanta, and I help a lot of small businesses stay out of trouble and get started and sometimes end and handle some litigation for them. So I'm all about business.
Oh, and that's why we're so glad you could stop by and talk to us, because we have a lot of people that are interested in starting their own businesses, and they think it's just as simple as, I'm going to get a couple of cards made and I'm in business.
Yeah, that's always dangerous.
Yeah, exactly. So we want to talk about how we can do it right.
Right.
Okay, so could you tell our audience what are some things I should think about before I start deciding I want to go into business and forming everything?
Well, you know, the first thing I think you really have to think about when you're starting a business is what you really want to do, and why you're doing it.
Okay.
You know, one of the things I tell business owners all the time is, you know, don't start your own business because you want to work less hours and make more money, because that doesn't happen. When you own your own business, you work a lot of hours. You know, you're doing things on Saturday, you're doing things in the middle of the night if you got to get something done for a client. And so folks that go into it with the idea of, I'm just going to start this business and roll, what happens is they end up spending a lot of money, and then they're not in business 6 months later because they didn't put a lot of thought into it. So, you know, the first thing before you file anything or get business cards is just think about what you want to do and how you would actually make money at doing that. And then it's just a matter of putting the right pieces into place and working hard.
So is it one of those things I hear often about, find your passion and it turns into a business? Is that something that you're looking for, or should be a little bit more thought put into it than that?
Well, certainly passion is important. It's very important. I mean, I'm very passionate about my law practice. I love helping people, you know, helping solve their problems. But passion only gets you so far. You know, most of the marriages in the world right now, they were passionate at one point or another, but 50% of them are shut down. So you've got to think of it in terms of passion is what gets you started. It's what your interest is. And certainly I love this movement of people trying to find innovative things to do because they're passionate about something. I mean, I know some business owners that do amazing things, but you have to take it a step further, and you've got to learn a little bit about business, how business works, you know, what kind of things you should spend money on and what you shouldn't spend money on, how much money you need, and all of those things take a little more research and need some questions asked.
That is great advice. Okay, so now we're at the point where we're looking for, we found money, we honed down just not our passion but our skills.
Right.
So I'm ready. So can you tell us the types of business entities out there that are available for them? Well,
for most people, you're going to be looking at either doing an LLC or an Inc. of some type. And you'll hear other words like S Corp and C Corp. A lot of people want to talk about partnerships. You know, to me, most businesses that I deal with are either going to be an LLC or an Inc. And the only difference there is administratively the companies kind of operate as a legal entity differently. When you hear people talk about S Corp versus C Corp, that is really a function of how you pay your taxes. And there's some tax things that companies can do, whether they're an S Corp or a C Corp. They can take advantages of different tax laws. And what I tell people is, you know, first figure out whether you want to be an LLC or an Inc., because that goes into what you file with the Secretary of State, and we can. I'm sure you got some more questions about that.
Absolutely.
But when you talk about tax structure in terms of, do you want to be an S Corp or an Inc., do you want to be a W-2 employee of your own company, or do you want to be an owner and only take draws? That kind of stuff, sometimes that's when we bring in some other experts like your tax planner, because a lot of that stuff with a individual company owner has to do with how their family taxes are paid, because you can take advantage, and you want to make sure you can take advantage of the tax code, but you got to know what your other tax exposure is. So if your spouse makes a lot of money and then you're going into business, you want to be able to take advantage of as many deductions in your business as possible to lower your household income. And the only person that really knows that is the person that files your taxes. So as a lawyer, what I tell people is I look at what their business is and how they're going to structure it, whether they have a bunch of partners or one partner. And then we pick an entity that works. Fortunately, in Georgia and with the tax code, an LLC can file its taxes as what's called an S corp, or it can remain just a regular LLC pass-through tax function. And that's really kind of complicated for people to figure out at first. But just about any accountant can give you some general advice on that, and it's well worth it to pay an accountant for like an hour consultant fee to ask them those questions.
And I want to hit on that too. We're forming a business, and what are the key players that we need to make sure we have on our team? And so I'm hearing you saying an accountant, and a good lawyer.
Yeah, and here's the thing: is you can pay. It's like anything else. One, you find somebody you like. Okay, I always tell people work with professionals you like, because it sucks paying people that you don't like,
I know,
and that you don't trust. Because if you don't trust them, you don't want to do that. So find someone that you like and you trust, but certainly someone that's competent in the area that they're in. So if you're talking to an accountant, you want somebody that deals with small businesses, not a tax accountant that's used to dealing with large corporations. And a lawyer the same way. And then you can ask them for things like, do they do like a 1-hour consultation? I will tell you, I have counseled many businesses very early on. They've got a great idea. They think they want to be in business. They call me up. They're really not at the point where they need me to start drafting a bunch of stuff for them. And I say, well, look, why don't you come in for an hour consultation? I'll give you some ideas. It'll be very limited to just what we're talking about there. Some of them don't start businesses later because they realize, golly, this is much more complicated than I thought, or I'm not really going to make enough money to make it worth my time. So that passion gets balanced with how much money they're going to make.
So back to the fact-finding mission. That's good.
And that's part of finding facts. And I don't know a lot of lawyers and accountants that deal with small businesses that won't do like an hour consultation or maybe a 2-hour consultation. But I can tell you, if you and your best friend want to go into business together, and you're putting maybe you just got downsized, maybe you quit your job, maybe you got fired, whatever. With this economy, there's a lot of people looking to do something interesting.
Exactly.
They got a great idea. Well, I always wanted to have, XYZ business with my best friend. We're sorority sisters. We've known each other for 100 years, and we want to go into business together. And they take what's left of their pensions and throw it into that business, but they never thought, let me sit down with the lawyer and get a good operating agreement, and let me sit down with an accountant and figure out if this is going to make us enough money for us to both be able to live. And what happens is they end up not being friends anymore because they both go broke in the business. So their 401k or their IRA money that they had was gone, their friendship's gone, and they don't have a business, so now they're looking for a job. So you got to do that fact finding up front.
Exactly.
And if
all
you do
for an
that,
hour could have saved you a whole lot of trouble.
Exactly, and that's what I tell people all the time. The litigation that I do for clients, half the time, if they just spent an hour or two with me, and is that expensive? Certainly. I mean, most professionals are going to charge you a decent hourly rate. The average for small business lawyers in Georgia can be between $200 and $400 an hour, depending on who you call and what their firm overhead is.
Yeah.
Because lawyers are business people too. But, when you think, man, I could have spent $500 or I could have lost my $30,000 IRA.
Exactly.
Then you start kicking yourself later. And that's the thing, is you gotta do your homework ahead of time.
Okay, so let's just backtrack a little bit, because you said LLC or an Inc.
Yeah.
So what are some of the others that I wouldn't want to do? Because we hear about joint ventures and partnerships, and me and my buddy was going to be partners. So what are the downsides of doing that, where you would say maybe more so an LLC or an Inc.? Or what are the advantages of LLC or Inc. as opposed to the others?
All right. Well, first rule is you should be some kind of company. Okay. Sole proprietorships, when you hear people talk about that, I am a sole proprietor, but I'm an LLC, which means I'm a company. So if you go into business and you don't have some kind of corporate entity, whatever it is, that's dumb. Okay, because as a sole proprietor, you have no protection under the law.
Okay, what do you mean by protection?
Well, and that's what we call lawyers. We have this term called the corporate veil. And what I tell my clients is, it's like a shield. Okay, you've watched old movies. You see the guy holding up the shield. Your corporation is a shield that protects you. In other words, someone can't come take your house. If your business does something, you get sued and you go out of business.
Okay, so it protects my personal access when I do an LLC or an Inc.
Right. So you should have some kind of corporate structure. So that's I don't know anyone that I have ever advised that they should be in business for themselves and not at least file. It costs you $100 with the Secretary of State. Why wouldn't you do it?
Well, I think some people just don't know.
Right.
And they think, if I do LLC or a corp, I'm gonna have more taxes to pay and
that's,
all of that.
That's a lot of the misconception that's out there with all this talk in the elections and all of this about corporate taxes, and I think the average person gets really super confused about that. So I mean, having a corporate structure does not mean you're going to pay more taxes. Hey, hopefully you are paying more taxes, because what does that mean? You're making more money. Okay, so that's okay. We don't mind paying more taxes, but so the first thing is you need to pick one of them. The second thing is which one do you want to be? Now, most people that are starting a small business cannot be a professional corporation. That's lawyers and doctors mostly. So they're not going to be in that realm. Most people, I will personally tell you, I have a very strong bias against quote-unquote partnerships. I think you should be an LLC or an Inc. And unless you're husband and wife, you should have an operating agreement.
Okay, now so let's go into that.
Yeah.
Okay, I've decided I'm gonna take your advice. I'm gonna be an LLC, or I'm with pass-through tax, or I'm gonna be an Inc. with S or C.
Right.
So what documents am I looking to put together to be able to form this company, and what goes where?
Okay. Well, the first things you're going to need to file with the Secretary of State, and they actually have forms for this. It's online. It's really easy. Most lawyers don't charge a significant amount of money to do this. I know I don't. It's a very flat fee to get your articles of incorporation filed.
Now, what are those?
Okay, it's basically a document that gets filed with the Secretary of State that says who the owners of the company are. It provides what we call a registered agent, which is just a person that if you do something to a third party out in the world, they know who to contact to get a hold of your company.
Okay.
Okay, so the registered agent and where your business address physically is, which basically is, honestly, it's to establish where you could get sued. Okay, so you file that document, but on the SOS's webpage, it's really easy to fill it out. You actually can fill it into boxes. It asks you questions, and it produces the document itself. So you don't necessarily need a 15-page articles of incorporation for your company, but you do need what's called an operating agreement. This does not get filed with the Secretary of State. This is your private corporate document about how your company runs. And the most important thing in that operating agreement is how much percentage both of the owners own, who makes decisions, and what happens if one of you does something wrong, dies, gets fired, quits, gets disabled. That's what we call succession planning. So when people hear succession planning out in the world, all that means is if you and I were in partners together and I got disabled and couldn't work, and here you are working in the business now, you went from working maybe 70 hours a week, because let's be honest, you're a small business owner, now you're working 100 hours a week because you're trying to cover mine too, you're going to start getting kind of mad.
Just a little bit, yeah.
Right?
I would think so.
So after about 6 months, when you had seen your family and your husband doesn't love you anymore and all that happens, we need to know how to break up at that point. So what the succession planning does is it figures out what happens if one of us gets disabled, if one of us dies, because who wants to be in partner with your partner's spouse? I don't. You know, what happens if one of us does something wrong? One of you steals money from the company and you didn't have the authority to do that. Do we break up the company? How does that work? So you can plan for that ahead of time, and you should, because when people go into business together, things change. I mean, look at this economy. So that's something you should plan for. The other biggest thing, like I said, is decision making and who owns what. So are you going to be 50-50 owners? Well, you can be 50-50 owners, but then one of you can have more decision making authority than the other one.
Okay.
The reason I don't like partnerships is when everybody has an equal say, at some point they will not agree.
Yeah, that is inevitable, I think. Yes.
So if you're at 50-50 and you haven't agreed on something, what happens? Do you go out of business? So, and then what if it's something really important, like buying a big piece of equipment, or you know, what money you're going to take out of the bank to invest in a new project? And so that's something that you've really got to think about, is who gets to be the tiebreaker. And
you know, that actually goes back to what you said initially, the long conversation that we need to have with ourselves or who we're going into business with before that happens. I don't think people think about it. They think about, we have this idea, we get along, we're going to make all this money.
Yes.
And we don't think about the inevitable that may happen.
Right, right.
Okay, so
and
we file articles.
Right.
Anything else that's filed with the Secretary of State, or is there a fee for that?
There is a fee for that. Depending on what you want to do, some people do what's called a name reservation, where you can kind of protect your name.
No, what is that process?
You just literally, you pay a fee and tell the Secretary of State what the name is while they're trying to process your paperwork. I don't do that with every company, depending on the time of year, if I think they have a lot of applications right now. But the flat fee generally is $100 to get your corporation set up with the Georgia Secretary of State. Okay. And that's real easy to pay. And that's a flat fee. Then you typically have to file what's called an advertisement with the local newspaper in the county you're in. Okay. And that basically costs about $40. Some counties vary a little bit. I wouldn't be surprised if some of these fees start going up, because basically everything's going up in price these days, it seems like. So you should calculate on about $140, $150 just to get this stuff filed. And if you have a professional do it, they might charge you $200, $250 just to make sure everything gets done right.
Yeah.
And they'll also keep copies of all your stuff, so that when you lose it, because that happens.
That happens, I'm sure. That's the last thing I'm thinking about is paperwork.
You can always call your lawyer back and say, hey, do you still have that email that you sent me with such and such with my articles on it? So you can still get your stuff. So that's kind of the initial breaking point of that's just to get you filed. And operating agreement, it depends on the type of company you have, how sophisticated it is. I wouldn't say if you're spending less than about $500, you probably haven't asked the right lawyer. Okay. That's just me being honest, because this is the thing that's going to control your relationship. It's the corporate version of a prenuptial agreement. If something goes wrong, here's what we're going to go to.
Yeah.
Okay. Otherwise, let's go make money and have fun. Okay. But if you don't have that operating agreement in place, of which so many people, one of the partners takes money out of the account because, they had a need, and normally they would do that, but it just didn't fit with where they were right at that moment in time. The other partner gets mad, and then they end up breaking up the company. You want to prevent that as much as possible, and you want to know what the rules are if that happens. Because that saves you a lot of money in litigation.
Wow. Okay. We're going to take a break here.
Absolutely.
And we come back. We're all formed up now.
Yep.
So we need to talk about how to protect ourselves and our company. So we'll do that in just a second. We'll be back in a few moments. You are tuned into Legally Speaking, a public service of You and the Law. You and the Law is a nonprofit whose mission is to provide legal information and legal resources to empower you in your legal affairs. If you would like to have a question answered or a topic featured on Legally Speaking, feel free to contact us online at www.youandthelawtoday.org. You can also sign up there on our website for our mailing list, as well as follow us on Facebook and Twitter. Remember, with every right comes responsibilities, so know your rights and accept your responsibility. Welcome back. We're talking to Attorney Heather Wright about how to start our own business and do it correctly. Heather, before we went to the break, we talked about all the things we need to do to get the business started. So now we have started the business, we have our articles, we have bylaws and operating agreements, and we're getting along.
Good.
Okay. That is a good thing, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So now we want to talk about, unfortunately, we're a very litigious society, and they will sue you just about anything.
Yes.
So can you tell us what are some policies, procedures that business owners should have in place to avoid needless litigation? Some things that you've known from your experience would have been helpful for them to have in place.
Absolutely. Well, I think the first thing is, like we were saying, between the owners themselves, operating agreement. Now you get the owners and the rest of the world. Okay, they're doing business. What I tell a lot of my business owners, and what we do sometimes, is we sort of have a little brainstorming session to talk about what their business is. And that's where I say a consultation with a professional can really help you. Because of our experience, we kind of know where your pitfalls are going to be based on what you're trying to do. Who are you selling to? What are you selling? Is it a product or is it a service? And each of these things can affect how you could get sued. Okay, now, so rule number one is you cannot prevent being sued. Okay, not 100%. I know that's sad to say.
I got an incorporation.
Yeah,
you can't sue me, can you?
Well, you can sue the company. And the problem is that we are litigious, and unfortunately, the first thing people do is start threatening lawsuits. What I tell most of my business owners is the best way to protect your company is to think about, where is my cash flow coming from? Okay. If this, and this happen, would I go out of business? Okay. Because once you figure out what those things are, is it not getting paid on time by my customers? Okay. if that's the biggest thing that could kill your business, let's say you have a small store, you sell some clothes and you got your rent and your lease space, and you sell, really cool clothes. We've got a couple places in Buckhead that are like this that I used to watch because I never saw anybody in the store and I was always wondering. So they've got lease space, they've got merchandise that they've probably bought, that maybe they're working with some designers that they're paying. So they've got a lot of cash outflow, but they've got to make sales, cash inflow. So they need to know how to collect. Obviously, a company that's a retail outlet needs to take credit cards. So that's a contract that they're going to want to make sure that they understand. Okay. Credit card contracts, you ain't going to negotiate with Visa about what their terms are, about how you get paid, but you should at least know how it works, how much they're going to charge you, so then you know how much to sell. If you're a contractor and you're counting on other people to do their job on time for you to be able to come in and do your job. Let's say you're an electrician, and if the guys don't frame up the walls on time, and your contract says that you're supposed to be done in a certain amount of time, but you couldn't get started until they got started, then you're in trouble if you didn't provide for your contract to say that the walls got to be up before you can get in to do your job. Amazing. So, you need to think about, how does my cash flow work? How can I protect that? Do I need collections provisions in my contracts? Do I need a contract with my customers? Most people don't realize that with retailers, that receipt is a contract. Most of them, if you flip them over on the back, you got a lot of gray lettering.
Yeah, absolutely,
that's just contract language that lawyers thought up and stuck on the back of there, and nobody ever looks at it until they've got to try to return something that costs a lot of money, and they're like, "Oh man, I only had 30 days." Exactly. But with a lot of business owners, they don't want to have a contract with their customers, and I know that sometimes that feel bad factor of, well, I'm demanding a contract. We're friends. I'm just trying to do business. And here's the thing: it's business.
If somebody trust your contract, not your friends.
Right.
People, not your contract.
Right.
You're absolutely right. Yeah.
And if somebody doesn't want to sign a contract, you got to say, well, why wouldn't you want to sign a contract? Because you won't pay me? That's the thing you got to worry about. So, what I say is, it really depends on your business, what kind of contracts you need. Not everybody needs every contract under the sun. And people go out on the internet and they think, well, I need this contract, or I need a non-disclosure agreement. That sounds awesome. Well, if you're not doing a lot of secret business, you don't need a non-disclosure agreement. And, do I need non-competes with my employees? Maybe.
So what's a non-compete?
Non-competes are where, basically, you're trying to protect your business. If you have an employee and then they go work for someone else, you don't want them competing with your company if they have a lot of information about your company.
So what type of business do you typically see that with?
We see it a lot with marketing people. It's a huge part of the marketing arena. And frankly, what I tell a lot of my clients is, because this area of law changes very rapidly, and it's actually been a pretty disputed area of law more recently, how you do non-competes. Like, is it a certain geographical area? Like, I only have my business in Gwinnett County, so I don't want so-and-so that leaves my company ever working in Gwinnett County again. They have a time element, a geographic element. But what I tell people is, you need to think about what your business really is. And usually we see non-competes with salespeople a lot, because the salespeople are the ones that actually are having that client contact.
Exactly.
If you're sitting back in your store and your salesperson's the only one talking to your customers, and then they leave you, that's a problem for you.
Yeah.
Right, because the customer has that personal relationship. So in those cases, you might want to consider a non-compete. I like what's called a non-solicitation provision better myself, which is, you tell that person they can't communicate with any of your customers. It's a lot easier to enforce. You give them a list when you fire them or when they quit. This is who you talk to. That's an important
distinction, yeah.
It's real easy to prove. So, it just depends on your company what your needs are with non-competes, non-solicitations, non-disclosure. If you have a really good idea about something, but you need someone to help you with that owns a different company, you want an agreement that says, hey, while we're talking about this, you can't, one, use it for anything but our deal, and two, you can't go do it with somebody else.
Oh, great.
So it really depends on what you're trying to do with your business. And that's why I say sometimes, a consultation with an attorney or an accountant, or maybe a marketing person, if that's what you need help with. What I find is, most of my business owners, they're really good at what they do, but they don't know what they don't know, and so part of it is trying to figure out, okay, I feel like I need a contract. Maybe I should talk to a lawyer. And most lawyers will be straight up and be like, yeah, you need this or you don't need that. And that's where I say it all goes back to find someone you like and that you trust.
The song is going to be, there's an extended relationship even with that. Okay, so I have a unique name or idea or concept. Is there anything I need to do on that? Any trademarks, copyrights, or anything like that? Should that be part of this process as well, or at least a thought or a conversation about it?
It should. I mean, I will tell you, it really should. And actually, I refer a lot of my stuff out to a couple of trademark lawyers because I don't do that. That's a very specific area of law. In fact, I think it's probably one of the folks you're going to be talking to that I refer to a lot. And, you know, you should think about it. Not everything is trademarkable. Not everything should be patented. Those processes can be expensive. You know, what I tell clients is, let's look at the name first. If you're going to have a name for your company, golly, you should at least Google it. You should at least check on the trademark websites about whether it's being used by someone else, so you're not infringing on someone else. And there are simple processes. Most business lawyers will do that before they incorporate you. But yeah, you should think about that. If you have the next best thing since sliced bread, I don't know why we all say that, but we do.
And, you know, I don't know where that came from, but it sounds good.
There's some pretty good stuff out there besides sliced bread. But yeah, you should really think about those things. If that's something that you need to protect, if you've got a great idea that nobody else is doing, then yeah, protect it. If you're in a market that's already out there, then no, you might not need to spend $10,000 to get a patent.
Yeah, for something that everybody's doing,
right,
or everybody's using.
Right,
yeah.
Right. And so, again, it all comes back to really thinking about what you're doing.
I hear that, people, thinking about what you're doing.
Enthusiasm is great. Listen, I love small business, okay? I love working with my small business owners. They should have enthusiasm. I love it when it's friends that want to go into business together. But you still got to have those serious conversations.
Absolutely.
You know, you wouldn't get married without talking about, do you want kids? Do you not want kids? What are we going to do about finances? A lot of people do, and look what happens. You should talk about those things ahead of time.
Okay, so we're getting to the end of the show. I can't believe it went by so fast. But before we go, I want to talk, is there anything that a small business owner may need to know about if I'm getting ready to bring on any employees? Anything I need to be thinking about in that vein?
Absolutely. If you're going to bring on employees, one, you should know the difference between an independent contractor and an employee.
Tell us that briefly.
Well, there's some set guidelines, and the problem is a lot of people don't understand. They'll think somebody's independent. If you are controlling the means and manner, which is basically if you tell the person that works for you when to show up, what to do, when they can leave, when they can take lunch, how many hours they have to work, they're an employee.
Okay.
All right. So if you call them in, and you can put independent contractor in their contract all day long, and let me just tell you, the IRS will enjoy telling you that they are an employee. Okay. So don't think you're gonna fake anybody out with that contract.
Okay.
All right. So make sure that if someone is independent, they are just that. Independent. They need to be able to operate on their own time. So, you know, when it's your computer guy, when you hire him and he's working at 3 o'clock in the morning, you don't care as long as the job is performed. So you need to have some distinctions, and that's huge right now. I see a lot of small businesses getting in trouble with that. But when you bring on employees, you also need to know what employment law requires you to do. The kind of things that you should be doing as an employer. Treating people fairly. No sexual harassment, even if you're a small company, because I hear small companies go, well, those laws don't apply to me. I can do whatever I want. Really, you can't.
That's good
you still
to know.
need to be a good person. You still need to do the right things. So if you generally know it, you don't need to be like IBM that's got, you know, 1 million employees in the state of Georgia alone. Okay, you need to know what IBM knows, which is we need to treat our people right. We need to treat them fairly, so then they don't go sue us. That's an important part.
And it sounds very simple, Heather.
You know what? Honestly, it is. If you really do well and think first, then you'll make a few less mistakes. You're still gonna make mistakes, but that's part of the fun.
Exactly. The growing pains, I call it.
Yeah.
Okay. We're definitely at the end of the show now.
All right.
So I want more information. You know, how can I find you? How can I find more information about all the stuff that you talked about?
Well, here's the thing. There's a lot of resources on the internet. What I will tell you is there's almost too many for small businesses to understand. One of the things that I do, because I am involved in the community, is I'm on Facebook at the Wright Attorneys. So you can find me there. That is only business stuff. I put up business law stuff all the time. Just some things to tweak business owners' mind of going, oh, wait a minute, I might need that.
So how can they find that?
It's the Wright Attorneys on Facebook. You just type in The Wright Attorneys and it should come right up.
Okay.
If not, you can go to my website, thewrightattorneys.net. I've
Okay.
got a Facebook and a LinkedIn and a Twitter. And I don't do everything that is business law. Like, I don't do trademarks. I don't do real intricate employment law stuff. I have lawyers that help me with that stuff. So I will at least help you find the right resource, because there's a lot of stuff. If you just start Googling things, the next thing you know, you'll be very confused. So I'd be happy to do that. I also know a ton of lawyers that are willing to do that. So, if you need a resource, just give us a call and be happy to send you to somebody if it's not something that we handle.
Okay. You heard it there. So you have no excuse, ladies and gentlemen. There's someone out there that can give you information. She that has a Facebook page that has business articles on it. That's part of that fact-finding process that we were talking about. So until next time, we're at the end of the show. We want to thank you, Ms. Wright, for coming.
Thank you.
And sharing your information with us. And remember, until next time, with every right comes responsibilities. So know your rights and accept your responsibilities. We'll see you next week. Is what we just act like we're still talking while she's fading to black. Cool. But good information. You're tuned into Legal